Good evening and welcome. Let's start with the big story that we are tracking for you here at WION. Tensions over Ukraine are ramping up. The West fears a full-fledged invasion. Russia is moving more and more troops to the border, while world leaders continue to shuttle between capitals. So is there a way out of this? Any outcome will come with its own repercussions. Currently, there are a few possible scenarios that could play out. One, diplomacy could prevail. World leaders are pushing hard for diplomacy to succeed. They are traveling from one capital to another with just one objective: to diffuse tensions and prevent this from escalating into a full-blown conflict. So if the West and Russia can come to a common consensus, this conflict could soon be over. But this needs at least one side to back down. And any backing down can be viewed as a loss in an already flared-up situation. So what is the other option? This brings us to the second scenario, a security deal between NATO and Russia. Russia long believed that it was betrayed by the West, that the West broke promises made at the end of the Cold War. The promise in question is that NATO would not expand to the east. But NATO did just that. It expanded eastward, with former Soviet Union nations joining the alliance. Putin has long argued that the U.S. broke a promise made in 1990. While there are different interpretations on what was promised to Russian leader Gorbachev then, Russian President Vladimir Putin has long looked at it as a betrayal. While NATO says it cannot compromise on its core principles of membership, Moscow and the alliance can find a common ground on other issues, like the revival of a failed arms control agreement, confidence-building measures between Russia and NATO, and greater transparency over military exercises. Russia has, however, made it clear that they have one core concern: Ukraine should not join NATO. Which brings us to option number 3, the Finlandization of Ukraine. The Cold War-era term was reportedly invoked by French President Emmanuel Macron. It refers to Finland's strict neutrality during the Cold War. The origin of this is enshrined in a 1948 treaty with Moscow. This was when tensions between the Soviet Union and the West were at a high. The deal fixed Helsinki's neutrality in place. It kept it out of an emerging NATO and impacted Finnish politics for years to come. But it is unlikely that Ukraine will support this. Neutrality will be a major concession for the country, which harbors Euro-Atlantic aspirations and also wants to join NATO. So if Ukraine and Russia do not want to budge on their demands, an easier option would be to revive an already existing agreement, the Minsk Agreement. Now, joining us live, our executive editor, Palki is on Ground Zero, covering all the latest developments. Joining us live from Kiev. Hello to you, Palki, and thank you for being with us on the broadcast. Now, you went to the Ukraine-Russia border. What is your assessment as you got a ringside seat for the ground situation?
Alyson, we left here early this morning. I'm back in Kiev. It was a race against time because we had to bring our viewers our broadcast as well just before this show. So we left early in the morning, and this is a straight highway linking Kiev to a border village called Senkivka, about 230 kilometers away. And that is being called the theater or the site of the first battle in case Russia decides to invade Ukraine. And we went to a checkpost which was basically a tri-junction. On one side you had the border of Ukraine, on the other you had the border of Belarus, and the third was the border of Russia. And just beyond this border, we know that Russian and Belarusian armies are conducting drills. We've seen the satellite images coming in of more troop deployments along this border, mostly in the east, but also in this region as well, 30,000 Russian troops. But on this side, what we saw was not this kind of deployment, not the kind of tanks that that we know that the Russians have deployed on the other side. We saw some border forces. We saw the guards there on standby. And they were well aware of how serious the challenge facing them was. Most of that area was covered in landmines, and we had to maneuver that area very carefully. But what we saw was a lot of tension. What we saw was nervousness in the border checkposts, because if the Russians decide to enter, you must have heard of all the predictions that Kiev would fall in 48 to 72 hours. This is a straight highway to Kiev if the Russians choose to take it. And from the kind of preparations that I saw on the Ukrainian side, the morale remains high. The troops, at least on camera, they say that yes, we are committed, and yes, we know what's coming our way, and we are prepared for that. In terms of military deployments, I did not see that kind of preparation. I don't think they stand a chance if the Russians get the orders from Moscow and march this way.
Right. U.S. President Biden is asking American citizens to leave Ukraine immediately. What message does this convey?
Not very good again. I just told you what the preparations on the border were like. Now, the Ukrainians on their own are no match for the Russians. We all know that. All intelligence assessments say that Kiev will be overwhelmed within hours. Within days, if not hours, in fact, if the Russians invade. Now, Ukraine is banking on its allies to give it support. The Americans have made it very clear that they will not send troops. Now, at a time when Ukraine is steadying itself and gearing itself to take on this challenge, to have their foremost ally tell its citizens that this is a big military we're facing and crazy things could happen in Ukraine. These are the words that the US president used, that things could go crazy in Ukraine in a very short span of time. So now is the time to leave, and we will not even send American troops to rescue Americans, to pull them out of here if they choose to leave in the event of a war. And that does not send a very good message to the people of Ukraine, to the government of Ukraine. Of course, they have been trying to tell everyone that these are exaggerated fears. The last time the Americans made this assessment, we heard the government in Kiev say that these doomsday predictions have no basis in truth. But the fact is that people are pulling countries are pulling their diplomats out of their embassies. The Americans are asking their people to leave. Some 6,600 odd American citizens live in Ukraine, and they've been asked to leave immediately, and that does not send a very good signal.
Right, Palki. Also, there's the diplomatic overtures that are continuing, leaders traveling from capital to capital, flurry of diplomacy. What could be Moscow's next move?
Moscow is clearly stating its demands, the demands which have been rejected by NATO repeatedly, that Ukraine should not join NATO, that NATO forces should pull out of this region, and so on and so forth. Now the government in Moscow is focusing on the Minsk Accord, and they're going to raise it at the United Nations Security Council meeting on the 17th of this month, that is next week. They are going to raise this, and they say that NATO's actions and America's actions are escalatory, and American troops should leave this region, and all the NATO soldiers or all the NATO equipment that has been given to Ukraine should be taken back, because this, according to Russia, is a red line. So Russia's position is very clear. It wants the Minsk Accord to be followed in letter and in spirit, and that's an accord that the government in Ukraine also says it's committed to, but won't implement on Russia's terms, and that is where the stalemate still continues. Remember, the situation in eastern Ukraine, especially in the Donbas region, is extremely critical. There is a lot of tension there, and this is a region controlled by Russia-backed separatists, and this is what the Minsk Accord focuses on. And the government in Ukraine has made it very clear that no compromise shall be arrived at the cost of Ukraine's sovereignty. So we come back to square one. All the talks, all the visits, all the bilaterals and trilaterals and all other meetings that are happening are frankly bearing no fruit, because the Russians keep saying what they've been saying. The Europeans and the Americans keep threatening sanctions, at the same time keep saying that there should not be a war. But what progress is being made on the ground? Nothing, except for the fact that Russia keeps amping up its deployments.
Absolutely. Palki, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest details there from Kiev.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.